My name is Joe Mangina. I teach systematic theology here at Wycliffe College, and in the absence of our principal, Dr. George Sumner, who's out recruiting and fundraising for the college, I have the honor and privilege of welcoming you here for this very special evening. Doctoral students sometimes ask me if there is anything else they can do with a PhD besides university teaching. I have various answers to this question. Become a scholar pastor. Go into religious publishing or journalism or media work. Become a novelist. Now I have another answer. You can become Canada's ambassador to the Office of Religious Freedom. Dr. Andrew Bennett indeed received a PhD in political science from the University of Edinburgh in 2002, having first studied at Dalhousie University and at McGill, where he received an MA in history in 1997. He has held a number of posts both in the realms of government and in academe, nor has he quite stopped being a student. He is in the process of completing a part-time degree in theology in Eastern Christian Studies at the Metropolitan Sheptyski Institute of Eastern Christian Studies at St. Paul University in Ottawa. Dr. Bennett, a native of Toronto, was appointed in early 2013 as Canada's ambassador to the newly instituted Office of Religious Freedom. The office's stated mandate is, quote, to fulfill the Government of Canada's pledge to speak out and to protect and promote religious freedom around the world. Central to this mandate is protecting and advocating on behalf of religious minorities under threat, opposing religious hatred and intolerance, and promoting pluralism abroad. The office is especially concerned for those places where there is evidence of egregious violations of the right to freedom of religion, including violence, hatred, and systemic discrimination. I am sure we will be hearing more this evening about the office and its work. Dr. Bennett is actively involved with Augustine College in Ottawa as volunteer dean and as professor of the history of Christianity. He is also a religious leader in his capacity as subdeacon and cantor with both the Holy Cross Eastern Catholic Chaplaincy and St. John the Baptist Ukrainian Catholic Shrine, both in Ottawa. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Bennett?
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Professor Mangina. I don't think I've ever spoken in such an august hall as this. It surely must be one of the gems on U of T campus. I'd like to also thank the principal here at Wycliffe, Canon Sumner, the chaplain and faculty of the college for their warm invitation for me to be with you this evening. I'd like to also recognize seminarians from St. Augustine's and their instructors as well. It's truly an honor for me to be here, and it was such a privilege to join all of you in worship this evening, especially through this beautiful service of evensong, evening prayer in the Anglican tradition. As a proud old boy of Royal St. George's College here in Toronto, it's always wonderful as a Catholic for me to have an opportunity to pray in the Anglican tradition, a tradition which has a place in my heart after partaking in, I'm sure, hundreds of evensongs at RSGC's Chapel of St. Alban the Martyr, just over on Howland Avenue, not too far from here. That my final evensong as a Georgian student was celebrated in the chapel at the place across the road is not something we'll dwell upon this evening. It is really wonderful, I have to say again, to have seminarians from St. Augustine's here. And this wonderful ecumenical dialogue and ecumenical relationship that you have is, I think, something that needs to be celebrated. As a former seminarian of Holy Spirit Ukrainian Greek Catholic Seminary in Ottawa, or as one of my cheekier theology professors at the Metropolitan Andrei Sheptytsky Institute used to call us semi-Aryans, It's always a blessing to be among those men faithfully discerning their religious vocation. So, gentlemen, my hat is off to you, and certainly my prayers are with you. I'm happy to be here to speak with you and to tell you a bit about the work of the Office of Religious Freedom and its place within Canadian foreign policy. I also hope to answer the question, why focus on religious freedom? Why is it important? In order to do this, I will focus on how we understand religious freedom, how it relates to the fundamental principles of freedom, the rule of law, human rights, or perhaps more profoundly, particularly from the Christian perspective, human dignity, and then also the principle of justice, and how these principles are oriented towards an understanding of truth. The issue of religious freedom has been increasing in global significance. As you know, there is increasing violent religious persecution taking place around the world, and this has been a deteriorating trend for some years. This violence touches all faith communities, and the Office of Religious Freedom speaks out on behalf of all communities facing persecution, no matter what their religious tradition might be, large and small, including those who may be persecuted because they choose not to ascribe to a particular religious faith. Religious freedom must encompass those who choose to not have religious faith, whether they be atheists or secular humanists or others. The trend for religious persecution across the board is shocking. According to the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, a Washington, D.C.-based think tank and analytical organization that does some of the finest work in this field, 74% of the world's population, that's 3/4 of the world's population, is now estimated to live in states with high or very high levels of government restrictions on religious freedom and or high or very high levels of social hostility by one religious group against another. This 74% of the world's population is represented in 2/3 of the world's states. Shockingly, this figure is significantly higher than just 5 years ago when we look at the trend that the Pew Forum has been following over the last decade or so. As I said, all faith communities are targeted by increasing persecution, including Tibetan Buddhists, Shia Muslims in many countries, Chaldean and Assyrian Christians in Iraq, Baha'is in Iran and other places, Sunni Muslims in Sri Lanka and Burma, Greek Catholics in Russian-occupied Ukraine, and members of evangelical Protestant house churches in China. However, notwithstanding, we also need to recognize that Christians in particular are the most persecuted faith group in the world. As reported by the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, again, Christians have suffered harassment by the state or within society from other groups in 133 countries. That's 2/3, again, of the world's nation-states, and suffer in more places than any other religious group. This is not to diminish the suffering of other people, of other faiths, but I think we need to speak about this, and we need to speak about it publicly. This is a fact, the level of Christian persecution, that is often not recognized, and even as we speak out against the persecution of all faiths, we should not be tentative in speaking out about Christian persecution as if it is politically incorrect to do so. We see this persecution of Christians in numerous and diverse contexts around the world. Most visible is the situation in Iraq and Syria, where we are witnessing barbaric, inhumane violence and displacement of ancient apostolic churches on an unprecedented scale. Christian persecution also continues in China, including through the intimidation of worshipers and the destruction of churches. Many of you might have followed the latest situation in Wenzhou, where numerous churches have been demolished because they supposedly violate local building codes. And in Ukraine, as a Ukrainian Greek Catholic, if you'd said to me a year and a half ago, Ambassador Bennett, you'll be focusing on religious persecution in Ukraine, I would have been quite shocked. And so maybe it's somewhat providential that I find myself in this role at this time. In Ukraine, Christian unity, which has been and is being nurtured by all churches in that country, is threatened by a Russian-orchestrated propaganda campaign which seeks to instrumentalize religion and manufacture divisions within Ukrainian society, to take what is essentially a geopolitical conflict and to try and turn it into a religious conflict between the various ecclesial presences in Ukraine. And this we have to speak out against. This growing problem, this trend of increasing religious persecution, explains why on February 19th, 2013, the Government of Canada chose to create the Office of Religious Freedom. And I'm the first ambassador to head that office. When we speak about and defend religious freedom, let me be very clear. We are not engaging in a theological proposition or debate. If it was a theological proposition or debate, we wouldn't get very far. No, the advancement and defense of religious freedom is about fundamental human rights. We see religious freedom articulated as a central pillar of societies in very early years and centuries before Christ. As early as the 3rd century, in what is now India, the Emperor Ashoka of the Mauryan Empire promulgated 33 edicts on the social and moral teachings of Buddhism. These edicts of Ashoka declare that, and I'm quoting them, "Contact between religions is good. One should listen to and respect the doctrines professed by others. The beloved of the gods desires that all should be well learned in the doctrines of other religions." The work of the office is focused on 4 specific areas: protecting and advocating on behalf of religious communities under threat; secondly, opposing religious hatred; thirdly, engaging in open and frank discussion with foreign governments and civil society on issues of persecution; and finally, promoting the ability of religious communities to manifest their faith and contribute to society openly and in a free and secure environment. These goals of the Office of Religious Freedom reflect the principles of democracy, freedom, human rights, and the rule of law which underpin Canada's principled foreign policy engagement, and, quite frankly, reflect the underpinnings of Canadian society as a whole. I think it's important to recognize these as fundamental principles. Too often when we speak about rights and freedoms, we use the discourse of values. Values, however, can change with the times. They can be altered depending on one's perspective. Fundamental principles, by contrast, are immutable. They are not relative or subject to the needs of the day. They are also not culturally specific, and therefore not the sole preserve of Western liberal democracies. These fundamental principles that I spoke to before speak to a universal truth that has at its core what I would argue is the foundation of human rights, and that is human dignity. In understanding the universality of religious freedom, we uncover its linkages to human dignity, which is a key concept in how we understand religious freedom at the office. And I would be a very bad Catholic if I did not discuss what Dignitatis Humanae has to say about religious freedom, that seminal document of the Second Vatican Council. I try to keep a copy in my back pocket as I travel the world. Dignitatis Humanae speaks about religious freedom and explains it thusly. And I quote, "Religious freedom means that all are to be immune from coercion on the part of individuals or of social groups and of any human power, in such wise that no one is to be forced to act in a manner contrary to his or her own beliefs, whether privately or publicly, whether alone or in association with others, and within due limits." It continues, "It is in accordance with their dignity as persons, that is, beings endowed with reason and free will and therefore privileged to bear personal responsibility, that all should be at once impelled by nature and also bound by a moral obligation to seek the truth, especially religious truth. Truth, however, is to be sought after in a manner proper to the dignity of the human person and his or her social nature. The inquiry is to be free, carried on with the aid of teaching or instruction, communication and dialogue, in the course of which men explain to one another the truth they have discovered, or think they have discovered, in order thus to assist one another in the quest for truth." In our work to promote religious freedom and to advocate on behalf of persecuted religious communities, we have spread the message of human dignity as central to the Canadian understanding of freedom of religion. Human dignity speaks to freedom of religion in this way. It speaks to human beings' innate desire to consider and come to know, who am I? Who am I in relationship to others? Who am I in relationship to the world in which I live? And who am I in relationship to God, or to a particular philosophy or worldview to which I adhere? Understanding the relationship between religious freedom and human dignity also reveals important connections to the fundamental principle of justice. This relationship is explored in part by Charles Taylor, who links the concept of human dignity to notions of equality in his very famous 1994 essay on multiculturalism and the politics of recognition. Taylor argues, with the move from honor in traditional societies to dignity in modern societies has come a politics of universalism, emphasizing the equal dignity of all citizens, and the content of this politics has been the equalization of rights and entitlements. Taylor also situates the notion of equal dignity within a society characterized by diversity and difference. And I quote again, everyone should be recognized for his or her unique identity, but recognition here means something else. With the politics of equal dignity, what is established is meant to be universally the same, an identical basket of rights and immunities. Within the religious freedom and justice paradigm, we can expand on Taylor's notion of equal dignity within a diverse society to see linkages between religious freedom and the protection of peace and order within a society. And here's where we can link religious freedom to, I think, other fundamental freedoms: freedom of expression, freedom of association, democratic freedoms, legal rights, the equality between men and women. As noted by the 17th century philosopher John Locke in his letter concerning toleration, religious freedom, including the non-instrumentalization of religion for coercive means, is crucial to the maintenance of peace and order within a society. Locke wrote, nobody, therefore, in fine, neither single persons nor churches, nay, nor even commonwealths, have any just title to invade the civil rights and worldly goods of each other upon pretense of religion. Those that are of another opinion would do well to consider with themselves how pernicious a seed of discord and war, how powerful a provocation to endless hatreds, rapines, and slaughters they thereby furnish unto mankind. Moving away from the philosophical arguments around religious freedom, I want to talk a little bit now about the actual functions of the Office of Religious Freedom and how we take, hopefully, this wisdom and put it into practice. I wouldn't get very far if I lectured in philosophy and other points as I advanced upon this mandate, but an important base nonetheless. So let me speak a little bit now about how, in practical terms, the Office of Religious Freedom seeks to advance its mandate of protecting those facing persecution and defending and advancing religious freedom as a core element of Canada's principled foreign policy. Engagement by the Office of Religious Freedom is structured along three tracks: advocacy, policy, and programming. So a fairly classic diplomatic troika. On the advocacy side, as ambassador, I've consistently spoken out about the importance of religious freedom, both internationally and here in Canada, because part of our mandate is to raise awareness within Canada about why we're doing what we're doing. And I've called attention to its violation internationally. This is conducted in part through my engagements overseas, where, as I mentioned, I engage regularly with foreign governments, civil societies, faith communities, human rights organizations, and others. I've visited Ukraine, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Turkey, Hungary, and a number of other countries to engage these governmental representatives, civil society organizations, and so on, to promote religious tolerance and to speak out on behalf of the persecuted. Let me say at this point that I'm not so naive to think that we're going to change things overnight. Through all of our efforts, whether it be advocacy, policy, or programming, when we engage the 15 or so countries that we're actively engaging in promoting religious freedom, we fully realize that in many cases we're dealing with what in effect will be, hopefully, multi-generational change. But we have to start somewhere. And there are many people that have paved this road before us, and so we're engaging in a lot of work that's already been done. The office also engages media to support its advocacy activities and again to raise awareness about why we're doing what we're doing. So I interact regularly with members of the Canadian and foreign media in coordination with my minister, John Baird, Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Prime Minister, and others as part of a communications platform including statements and speeches, such as here this evening, on issues that relate to religious freedom. Our media engagements promote an increased understanding of the office, its mandate, and our activities. So, as ambassador, I serve my minister. I serve Minister Baird. The office is situated within the Department of Foreign Affairs, and as a civil servant, that's my background. I'm not a partisan actor. I act within the civil service, and I'm there to serve the interests of my minister and of the government more broadly. And so in doing so, we seek to again serve Canadians, to serve all of you, and that's why it's important that we explain to you in many different forms what we're attempting to accomplish in your name. Our media engagements promote an increased understanding of the office, its mandate, and our activities. The office has been profiled in Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, Catholic Register, the Canadian Jewish News, among other print media outlets. We've authored some op-ed pieces in the National Post and other publications, particularly most recently on persecution of religious minorities in the Middle East. We also have an active online presence. Through the Office of Religious Freedom's website, we publish statements condemning religious-based violence, calling governments to account for their actions or inactions, and we seek to draw attention to specific violations of religious freedom around the world. For example, in May of this year, I drew attention to the plight of Miriam Ishaq Ibrahim. Many of you will know a Christian woman from Sudan, previously imprisoned there, accused of apostasy. And we worked very actively with our allies to secure her release, which, thank God, was achieved. Our online presence is also supported through social media. So I invite all of you to like our Facebook page. And those of you who engage in Twitter, I never thought I would until I was told that I had to. I encourage you, if you'd like to follow our Twitter feed, please do that. We're pretty active. Our social media efforts help amplify messages spread through other engagement that Canadians and others wouldn't necessarily see regularly. But also, it allows us to interact with others interested in religious freedom through retweeting our statements and the tweets of and statements coming from all different parts of the world around this question of religious freedom. So we see the advocacy part of our mandate as reinforcing the relationship between religious freedom and the fundamental principle of truth. In an obvious sense, the immediate objective for much of our advocacy work is to speak the truth about the plight of individuals and persecuted religious groups, to help build support for efforts that will alleviate their suffering, including those persecuted for the choice, as I said, not to adhere to a religious belief, or those who openly wish to disagree with the belief as it's been established. And I would highlight the case of Raif Badawi in Saudi Arabia, or atheist bloggers in Central Asia who often are imprisoned and tortured for daring to question the established orthodoxies in their country. In a wider sense, our advocacy efforts aim to strengthen an understanding of how religious freedom promotes an understanding of what is true. Abdul Rahman Wahid, a Muslim religious scholar who served as the first democratically elected president of Indonesia, once wrote, and I quote, "The fact that the Quran refers to God as the truth is highly significant. If human knowledge is to attain this level of truth, religious freedom is vital. Indeed, the search for truth, i.e. the search for God, whether employing the intellect, emotions, or various forms of spiritual practice, should be allowed a free and broad range. For without freedom, the individual cannot attain absolute truth, which is, by its very nature, unconditional freedom itself." And I think those of us here, Christians, we can see a common message there. We know that as Christians, when we speak about the truth, we're not talking about an abstract philosophy. As part of our mandate, we advance freedom of religion as a core component of Canadian foreign policy. So here I'd like to focus a bit on our policy activities as distinct from our advocacy activities. They're interlinked, but in the world of diplomats, we like to sort of define things in certain ways. It keeps everybody feeling good. So our policy work, we engage within the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development through training, for example. We've developed a course at the Canadian Foreign Service Institute to help increase understanding amongst our colleagues of religious freedom and help ensure that Canadian diplomats are equipped to put into practice the promotion of religious freedom across our global network. I also speak annually to our outgoing heads of mission, so outgoing ambassadors, high commissioners, consul generals, to talk about why we're seeking to advance religious freedom and what they might encounter in the countries in which they are posted. I think it's important to note at this point that a lot of our colleagues recognized when the office was being established that often when they go off on posting, they move from a highly secular society here in Canada to countries where religion is the dominant force. Not only is it shaping a cultural discourse, but it is predominant within political discourses, economic discourses, social discourses, and religion and faith are a core component of that society. And we need to engage religion and seek to understand it. Not only religious literacy, but also faith literacy. And this is a point that we've reinforced with our colleagues, and our colleagues have been very responsive to this because they realize, and I think we realize, that if we don't have an understanding of religion and its role within societies, particularly those societies where it has a very dominant role, then we risk developing a very serious diplomatic blind spot, and we won't be able to fully engage. And that's gaining, I think, much greater credence not only in the Canadian Foreign Service, but also in the US and in the UK, where they've also developed similar training components and training platforms. The office also has engaged with various faith community representatives to come to the department and present an overview of their faith community and its traditions. For example, in September, we recently organized a brown bag lunch and learn session with our colleagues to put them into contact with representatives from minority Iraqi religious communities, including different Christians and the Yazidi community, just to get them to see face-to-face who they're speaking out on behalf of. And it was interesting, a lot of, some colleagues commented that when they thought we were talking about Iraqi Christians, they assumed that these were Anglicans and Catholics and Presbyterians and so forth. They had no sense of these ancient apostolic churches, you know, that after the, here's my church historian bit coming in, I mean, after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, you know, the community in Jerusalem, a lot of it moved towards Edessa, where King Abgar, and the Armenians don't like this when I say this, but King Abgar was the first with his people to accept Christianity in the kingdom of Edessa. And then we can see, you know, through those first centuries of, through the sub-apostolic age and into the patristic period, how the Church of the East in particular became this great evangelizing force in the Near East and in the Far East, as many of you will know. So to put our colleagues into contact with these Christians of the Chaldean, Assyrian, and Syriac backgrounds, and also with Yazidis, a religion that dates back to the Babylonian period, it was quite an eye-opener for many of them. More in-depth education efforts and policy dialogues are also advanced through a program that we developed of quarterly seminars called the Religious Freedom Forum. These seminars are hosted by our office and bring together academics, public servants, and other communities of interest to engage in dialogue on the issue of religious freedom. The goal is to present the Department and other Government of Canada colleagues with a better understanding of the issue in its global context. So some of the past seminars that we've organized to discuss religious freedom have been focusing on the state of religion in China, the persecution of Christians in the Middle East, a seminar that one of my colleagues subtitled Arab Spring, Christian Winter. We have an upcoming seminar on November 24th that will look at religious freedom and Islam, and we will have another seminar in the new year that'll be our probably sometime in January or February, that will look at the question of freedom of religion or freedom from religion. Some people get confused on that. We're also engaged in promoting religious freedom with like-minded countries. The United States Department of State contains an Office of International Religious Freedom, which is a key partner. We have also advanced bilateral policy dialogues with the United Kingdom, Germany, Indonesia, Nigeria, and a number of others. And we actively participate in multilateral efforts of the United Nations on religious freedom through co-sponsorship of Resolution 1618 in the Human Rights Council, which is the sort of premier resolution on freedom of religion or belief, and through our active support of the work of the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Religious Freedom, a German philosopher and theologian, Dr. Heiner Bielefeld, who teaches at Erlangen, I believe. To build more broad-based support for religious freedom, our office and Canada, more specifically, has spearheaded the development of a new multilateral contact group. We're calling it the International Contact Group on Freedom of Religion or Belief. Participation in the contact group is based on common support for Article 18 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states, and I quote it, "Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief." That is the acid test for a country if it has religious freedom, I would argue. "And freedom either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance." The contact group will act as a vehicle to share information about initiatives, programs, projects, events, and best practices that support the advancement of freedom of religion. And membership in the contact group, as I just want to sort of be clearer, is based on an explicit acceptance of the Article 18 definition of religious freedom, and a willingness to put that into action. We recognize also, however, that the legal and intellectual foundations for religious freedom extend much further back than the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As early as 626 AD, for example, the Prophet Muhammad wrote a letter to his followers concerning the Christian monastic community of St. Catherine in Sinai. And the monks at St. Catherine have preserved this document, and it has a Muhammad's handprint on the document. This document exhorted Muhammad's followers to protect Christians living under Islamic rule, to safeguard their freedom of worship and movement, their freedom to appoint judges and to own property, their exemption from military service and taxes, excuse me, and their right to protection in times of war. I talk about the acts, the edicts of Ashoka, this letter of the Prophet Muhammad, and various other classical and more modern manifestations of religious freedom and articulations of religious freedom as points of reference to help promote an understanding of the universality of religious freedom beyond the Western tradition. I think it therefore helps us inform a policy that we're seeking to implement and develop that emphasizes religious freedom not only as a part of a discourse of liberalism and rights, but as a part of a universal human experience centered again on human dignity that is inclusive of traditions outside our Western orientation. I'm just getting over a bit of a cold, and I always thought St. Blaise was a great intercessor, but I'm reconsidering that. But the office manages a small envelope of $4.25 million per year to support projects that help advance our mandate. Our total budget is $5 million. $4.25 million of that each year goes to programming. Projects funded under the Religious Freedom Fund, that's that pool of money, to date have focused on awareness of activities that provide education on freedom of religion or belief, research to support foreign governments' engagement in the area of respect for religious diversity and pluralism, conferences and seminars on promoting interreligious dialogue, and most importantly, I think, legal support or specialized services and aid to support freedom of religion or belief and respect for pluralism on behalf of persecuted groups or individuals. Through the Religious Freedom Fund, we are engaged in a number of different countries. In Sri Lanka, we are supporting a project with the International Center for Human Rights Education to engage government, policymakers, legislators, religious and traditional leaders in dialogue and to build the capacity of civil society organizations on international human rights norms and develop national legal frameworks to monitor and document violations. So to actually document violations of religious freedom, which then report to national bodies and also internationally. In Pakistan, we have two projects. Our Leaders of Influence program aims to support organizations within Pakistan to ensure and promote policy reforms and laws that are implemented to reduce the grievances of and discrimination against various religious communities. This project will also help improve the status of religious communities within society and improve treatment of communities and greater tolerance and promote greater tolerance and understanding. Now, again, we're not going to solve the complexity of the challenges in Pakistan, but we were able to engage there, and that's the most important thing. Of the 15 or so countries that we are actively engaging, well, we're actively targeting, let me say, in the area of religious freedom, there's a very broad spectrum. On the one end, we have countries such as Iran, Saudi Arabia, and China, where we have very little prospect of direct engagement, let alone having projects on the ground. On the other extreme, we have countries such as Pakistan, Nigeria, Indonesia, where we can engage actively in advocacy, policy, and programming, where we can have dialogues with those governments, and they're open to Canadian involvement and Canadian support. To support, what they understand is some challenges in what are also pluralist societies. Just as Canada is a pluralist society, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nigeria, Indonesia, also very diverse, multi-faith, multicultural societies, where we feel not only can we bring an international understanding of religious freedom, but also the Canadian experience of religious freedom in a multicultural and multi-faith society. We're also funding projects in a number of other regions, including Nigeria's Plateau State. Our project here aims to develop local mediation capacity and the creation of dialogue opportunities between community and religious leaders. And this includes clerical leaders, lay leaders, women, youth. The goal here is to develop a roadmap with all the different players involved in the intercommunal conflict between Muslims and Christian communities in and around the city of Jos. Many of you will remember a number of months ago, there was a series of bombings in Jos. And this project that we're currently funding is sort of in its end of its second phase into its third phase. The first phase was funded by CEDA, what was formerly CEDA, now the development wing within the department. And so, excuse me, this mediation and dialogue capacity has been in place now for some time. And when those bombs went off, this network of Christian and Muslim leaders immediately sprang into action and diffused the situation, saying, don't react, don't use this as a cause to create greater sectarian division or promote greater sectarian violence, and it worked. And so the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, based out of Geneva, that has developed this program that we've been engaged with from the very first phase under when CEDA was funding it, this has now been seen by a number of other African countries who think, this could be an approach for us as well. Recently, we announced a project in Ukraine with the Catholic Near East Welfare Association, KNEWA. This is a project designed to deepen intercultural awareness and understanding among the many different ethnic and religious communities in different regions of Ukraine and provide a better understanding of the challenges to freedom of religious expression. So this is a project that involves the Ukrainian Catholic University, the Religious Information Service of Ukraine, and part of it will bring youth from Eastern Ukraine, Southern Ukraine, Crimea, hopefully, Western Ukraine, to talk about religious freedom, the role of religious communities, churches in society, the role that they play in terms of other freedoms, democratic development, and it's my understanding that they'll be bringing youth from Slovakia and Poland to talk about their experiences coming out of their transition into democracy. So to conclude, through our advocacy, policy, and programming work, the Office is working to advance religious freedom around the world. Again, we're trying to do our small part. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, we can see the need for this all too clearly in the increasing global religious-based persecution, especially under the recent spread of the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL. And again, we continue to be shocked by the horrific persecution there. All countries and peoples of conscience should be outraged by the gross violations of human dignity that ISIL's persecution represents. At the same time, they have inadvertently reinforced and drawn attention to the critical relationship between religious freedom and the fundamental principles of truth, dignity, and justice. These fundamental principles are central to Canada's efforts to promote religious freedom as a key component of our foreign policy, and I hope I've given some insight today into how we're hoping to do that. From Iraq to China, to Nigeria, to Ukraine, to Hungary, where we're looking at increasing anti-Semitism. Through our bilateral relationships and our multilateral work, Canada will continue to promote religious freedom as a reflection of our multicultural and multi-faith heritage. But most importantly, and this, I think, resonates with all faith communities that I engage, we do it because it's the right thing to do, and it bears witness to what is true. Thank you very much.